Hi, I'm Micah Halpern. Thank you for joining me today as I do some thinking out loud. Our first segment is called Background Briefing. The first thing I've been thinking about is Passover, Pesach. For the first time in 2 years, COVID is no longer the most spoken about agenda item in either my personal or professional circles. It is a welcome change. Now we talk about Passover and Ukraine. And while I wish the world did not need to think about, and take action for Ukraine, there is no denying its immediacy and urgency. The crisis in Ukraine and the byproducts of the Russian invasion into Ukraine are rightfully and assuredly front burner items. Real risks and real tragedy are unraveling before our eyes. The spillover into Poland, Moldova, Hungary, Romania is significant. Amongst the millions of refugees are thousands, tens of thousands of Jews who need help, our help. Thousands of Jews who, unlike us, will be celebrating Passover in a new and different way this year. For them, this Passover will certainly be different from all others. However different our past two COVID-era Passover celebrations were, they pale in comparison to the Passover experience these Ukrainian Jews and now former Ukrainians will commemorate. 2 years ago, we bemoaned the restricted Passover celebrations we had due to COVID. Passover preparations were private and very modest. People who had never made Passover in their home were forced to clean and cook and make Pesach. Preparations were more modest than in previous years. The rabbis even eased the rules of kosher to accommodate for COVID. And most Seder tables were less populated than in the good old pre-pandemic holidays. Last year, by the time Passover rolled around, restrictions had eased a bit. Passover Seders were still modest, but not as bare bones in terms of the guest list as it was in the previous year. This year, we are just about at full blast. Hotel programming is up, running and guests are happening all over. People are inviting people to Sedarim. Passover will never be the same, and it shouldn't be. Passover is about remembrance. It's about traditions, it's about family, and we should always remember and tell over the history of our Jewish nation's Passover and our own Passovers, even the pandemic Passovers. Since childhood, Passover has always been my favorite personal holiday. It's my favorite. Why Passover? And I think it had to do maybe with the prep work that goes into the holiday, and the cleaning and the cooking and the schlepping, the helping, the teamwork, the crying as I graded the maror. It was working towards a product that would culminate with the first Seder. For me in the diaspora, it is always the first Seder that resonates. The second Seder, especially after living in Israel for so many years, is plain and simple anticlimactic. Many people I know disagree. They might be rationalized living in Chutz La'aretz, outside of Israel, but they claim that they are too exhausted to enjoy the first Seder and look forward to the second, maybe, but not me. Whether it's one or two Sedarim, I try to fill the Seder with new and different ideas, to draw out conversations, discussions, and dialogue, to engage children, anyone who might be at the Seder themselves. I lean back in my Seder chair with a stack of Haggadahs in front of me and cull from each of them, offering differing and different and often conflicting commentaries on the story. I even look at the artwork. If it's not interesting for me, it won't be interesting for my family or my guests. Ever since childhood, Passover came with a message that spoke to me. It was about freedom, hard work, the triumph of good over evil, and destiny. It's all there for us to read about and remember year after year, Seder after Seder. It's a story that will never get old. It's a story that's renewed for us as Jews every year. Think about the Soviet Jewry. The secret Hebrew classes, the celebrations, and Passover Seders culminating in freedom, in our lifetime, in our recent memory, successfully added elements to our Seder when I was growing up. They made it more relevant. In many homes, as in mine, there was an empty chair at the Seder, a chair for a Soviet Jew. On that chair we had a name and a picture of a refusenik. We have readings about Soviet Jewry connecting the story of the exodus of the children of Israel enslaved in Egypt to refuseniks in the Soviet Union. Some years we even had an extra piece of matzah on the table dedicated to those brave refuseniks, prisoners of Zion. Those Passover experiences, while I was still a child, shaped my life as an adult. It would be a wasted educational experience not to let what is happening now in our world infuse and imbue this year's Seder. This year, I will be dedicating time at my Seder to speak about the great history of the Jews and Judaism in Ukraine. Ukraine was home to Baal Shem Tov, the birthplace of Hasidism, the home of Rabbi Nachman of Bratslav, of Echad Ha'am. It was home to Chaim Nachman Bialik, to Zev Jabotinsky, to Golda Meir, and a host of other political leaders. The great past of Jewish Ukraine should be memorialized, and the hundreds of thousands of Jews who lived in the Ukraine before Putin upended their lives should be honored. I know that's what I'll be doing. I hope you will do it too. Wishing all of us a Chag Kasher v'Sameach, a happy Passover. I've also been thinking about another holiday, not a Jewish holiday. I've been thinking about the month of Ramadan. Ramadan. World over, people who wield power are sitting in anticipation of what widely is held to be the inevitable, terror attacks during Ramadan. In one recent week, there were 3 deadly attacks in Israel. Analysts, security experts, heads of state are all preparing for more on their turf, on their soil, on their watch, to the people for whom they carry responsibility, not just Israel. The embassies of the United Kingdom and of France around the world have issued warnings to their citizens not to travel unnecessarily. In Kenya, the French embassy issued the following statement. In the context of the upcoming religious holidays, notably Easter and Ramadan, Kenyan police services are reporting an increased terrorist risk during the month of April in Kenya. It is therefore recommended that all people present in the country exercise extreme vigilance and stay away from any gatherings during this period, unquote. The UK, the United Kingdom Embassy, issued a similar warning, highlighting a high risk of terrorism during religious holidays. Their statement read, quote, during this period, United Kingdom nationals are advised to be extremely vigilant, unquote. Ramadan has begun. The month-long Muslim holiday started on Saturday, April 2nd, and will continue through Sunday, May 1st. Ramadan, a month-long fast from dawn to sunset, falls in the 9th month of the Muslim calendar. It's the holiest month in Islam, and fasting during this month is an essential part of the adherence of Islamic tradition. It's one of the 5 pillars of Islam. The act of fasting is known in Arabic as Swam. Linguistically, it is exactly the same word as the Hebrew word tzom. The rewards that are promised for those who fast are impressive. The month of Ramadan is supposed to be a month of introspection, of prayer, of doing good deeds. Ramadan is also a synonym for the name of God, or Allah, in Arabic. That is why so very often we see the term referenced not as the standalone word, but as the month of Ramadan, so as not to confuse the two. The word Ramadan means scorching heat in Arabic. In other words, the essence of the Muslim God is scorching heat. Perpetrating acts of terror during this period is not mentioned in the Quran, and yet this holy month has been turned into a time during which Muslim terrorists embrace the act of executing mass murderous plots against Muslims and non-Muslims alike. Terror during the month of Ramadan has become a jihadist custom. Modern jihadist terrorists believe that Ramadan is the time to intimidate, threaten, murder, and force others to view Islam the way they view Islam. Examples of terror during Ramadan run into the dozens. In 2017, for example, during the month of Ramadan, the Taliban, specifically a Taliban subgroup under the name Haqqani Brigade, exploded a bomb in Kabul. That bomb killed 90 people and injured 400. Almost every victim was a Muslim. In the eyes of the terrorists, this murderous act was a celebration of the month of Ramadan. The Haqqani Brigade is not alone. All jihadist groups share this perspective on the month of Ramadan. They believe that during the month of Ramadan, they are expected to make the ultimate sacrifice. The words ultimate sacrifice is shorthand for suicide bombers, or something like that, for laying down your life while fighting for the glory of Islam. Muslim suicide bombers do not see themselves as committing the act of suicide. They see themselves, and are seen by other adherents to Islam, as shaheed. Shaheed in Arabic is suicide. Suicide, by the way, is forbidden in Islam. Similarly, in Christianity, it's called the mortal sin. So the jihadist suicide bomber is seen and sees him or herself as a martyr, someone who dies in battle for the honor of Islam. Jihadist Islamic perspective creates an us versus them dichotomy. If you do not support the methods of jihad, then you are an enemy of their form of Islam and therefore a target. In their eyes, anyone who sees the world or Islamic tradition differently from them is no longer a Muslim. For them, it is really a personal issue. Al-Qaeda, Islamic State, IS, formerly known as ISIS, the Taliban, they all invoke these ideas. It's how they recruit. It's how they teach. It is how they convince their Muslims and other Muslims that the others are not true Muslims. It's how they create terrorists. It explains how the month of Ramadan became a centerpiece of their Muslim mission. And you might have noticed, the month of Ramadan does not regularly fall, by the way, during the same period of time, or even during the same season, year after year. Islam functions on a lunar calendar. They have 354 days in a year, in contrast to the solar calendar, which has 365 days. A lunar month is approximately 29 days and 12 hours long. Every Muslim year is 11 days shorter than the solar year. Hence the different seasons. Interestingly, although there are certainly fanatically observant practitioners of Islamic tradition, Iranians don't call it Ramadan. Instead, they call it Ramazan. In Farsi, the language of Persia, the letter D is pronounced like the letter Z. But don't be fooled, the pronunciation is different. But jihadist is a jihadist, and adherence to tradition is the same. Jihadists and their organizations are on the rise. Islamic State, Al-Qaeda are recruiting again. We need to be aware of the dangers ahead. We need to plan accordingly. The month of Ramadan is here. We are in its sights. Each of us must realize that we are a target and we must pay attention, careful attention. Coming up next, points of view. First up is a column from the Jerusalem Post. It was published on April 3rd, 2022. It's written by Shmuel Katz. It's entitled, Anti-Semitism Doesn't Differentiate Between Good and Bad People. Subtitled opinion, misinformation and deception are affecting and worrying rise in anti-Semitism that is affecting our society in multiple ways. The intent of this column is to explain that some people, some leaders, some countries, that are seen as good and upstanding, sometimes make awful decisions when it comes to anti-Semitism, Jew hatred, and hatred of Israel. Some actually embrace anti-Semitic policies. This is how Katz begins. It is a very troubling trend that good people support ideologies or causes that go against their interests and values due to heavily financed deception and misinformation about historical and current events. This misinformation and deception are also affecting the worrying rise in anti-Semitism that is affecting our society in multiple ways. We can see a surge in violence, an increase in economic challenges, and a deterioration in the objectivity of reporting by individuals and organizations who are supposed to be objective. Katz now gives examples, excellent examples, proving his point, like the recent Amnesty report that condemns Israel and the decision by the United States to drop Iran's Revolutionary Guard from its terrorist list. Katz writes, a few recent examples are Amnesty International's recent, totally distorted report on Israel. The U.S. government considering moving Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, one of the most dangerous terrorist organizations, from the list of internationally recognized terror organizations, and respectable American universities that are buckling to pressure by malicious BDS operatives and are implementing anti-Israel and anti-Jewish policies. Katz explains how these decisions need to be confronted. He explains that Jews need to stand up against BDS and the like. He writes, in order to combat this scary trend, Jews need to stand together against anti-Semitic organizations like BDS and discredit them, because just as they'd like to dismantle the only Jewish and democratic state in the Middle East, they also support terror organizations who not only want to destroy Israel and kill Jews, but also want to dismantle the free democratic values of the Western world. Even if Jews disagree with some of the policies of the Israeli government, they should not fall for anti-Israel operatives that tell them they want to change Israeli policy while not accepting Israel's right to exist in the first place. Katz concludes that Jews need to understand that Israel is not perfect, but it is an essential part of Jewish life. And most importantly, we should try not to harm Israel. And Katz writes, All responsible parents, adults, community leaders, and educators must focus their attention on the younger Jewish generation, providing them with the tools to see the big picture and the facts about Israel as a haven for Jews around the world. Even if it's not perfect, we must support it and work together to make it better. However, we should never abandon it, or worse, try to hurt it. As Ukrainian Jews are realizing now, a strong, thriving, democratic Jewish state is the core interest of Jews around the world. Those who undermine it and try to lure young Jews to hate Israel should be challenged sooner rather than later. An excellent piece. Next up is a column by Smadar Perry. It was published on April 2nd, 2022 in Ynet. Perry is Ynet and Yediot Achronot's Arab affairs commentator. She has given exceptional insight for decades, truly decades. This column is entitled, Negev Summit Shows Mideast Unified Against Iran, Divided on Palestinians. Subtitle, Analysis. The summit allows Israel to flaunt military agreement with Morocco and showcase a united front with the Gulf against Tehran, despite chronic disagreements between all sides regarding the Palestinian issue. This is how Perry begins. Despite efforts on Israel's part, Jordanian Foreign Minister Ayman al-Safadi will not take part in Sunday's five-way regional summit attended by the foreign ministers of the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, Morocco, Egypt, and U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken. Efforts to persuade al-Safadi to join the summit were made last weekend during King Abdullah II and the foreign minister's visit to Ramallah. Itself meant as a show of support for the Palestinian Authority, President Mahmoud Abbas. Israel has made the effort to include Jordan in the summit, despite knowing full well that al-Safadi will seek to accentuate and emphasize the Palestinian issue during meetings, which Jerusalem prefers to sweep under the rug. Nonetheless, this two-day regional summit, headed by the Foreign Minister Yair Lapid, is an impressive display of power, all the more so considering it came mere days after Prime Minister Naftali Bennett met with Egypt's President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi and Abu Dhabi Crown Prince Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed Al Nahyan in Egypt. Among other things, the summit may allow Blinken to attempt to fix Washington's muddied relationship, both the UAE and Egypt. The latter, which is often slammed by the United States President Joe Biden for its abundance of human rights issues. Perry now explains the Arab leaders are doing and related to PM Netanyahu, former Prime Minister Netanyahu. She says, Netanyahu, for his part, has the right to brag that he's the one who weaved the burgeoning relationship with the Gulf, as well as Egypt's El-Sisi. From the moment he lost Premier's chair, however, the leaders of the Arab world deleted his number from their phones. Now they are rushing forward with Bennett and Lapid's Iran-busting policy. Perry's conclusion is truly insightful, and it's the best part of her column. She explains that there is tension among Israel's leaders and tells us where Arab leaders see the direction in Israel heading, Perry writes. Another official who will not take part in the summit is Defense Minister Benny Gantz, whom diplomats from the Arab states talk with only when it comes to the Palestinian issue. The Arab embassies in Israel have reported a rift between Bennett, Lapid, and Gantz. Many are even expecting Gantz to jump on Netanyahu's Likud bandwagon, sabotaging the current coalition. The Arab world regards Gantz as a diplomatic figure who is much more willing to talk with Abbas and the Palestinians than either Bennett or Lapid. That is why the Arab states are always taking Gantz into account when it comes to negotiations. Again, an excellent piece. Smadar Perry did an excellent job. Coming up, commentary through cartoons, where pictures tell the story. I want to show you 5 cartoons and memes today. They're all about Putin. For a cartoonist, Putin is such an easy target of humor and critique. Some would say that he's even an easier target than Donald Trump was. The first cartoon makes fun of a now infamous slap heard around the world when Will Smith slapped Chris Rock at the Oscars. Now it's Putin slapping Chris Rock. Rock is wearing a name tag which reads Ukraine. After slapping him, Putin says, "Let's talk peace." This next cartoon is of Putin behind the proverbial curtain. The cartoon is a play on the famous scene from The Wizard of Oz, when the group finally makes its way to the wizard, and Toto, the dog, pulls back the curtain to reveal the true wizard, a little figure who is just using the machine to bluster and make himself huge. The cartoon reads, "The big, the mighty Russian military machine." The cartoon so clearly describes this. It's hilarious in terms of the Russian army. Next up is a hilarious depiction of the Russian army and its retreat of Russian knights in armor. A small little rabbit frightened the army, and they are running away, shouting, "Run away, run away." The caption above the rabbit reads, Russian translation for, "We are fundamentally cutting back military activity in Ukraine." Yes, they're running away in some places. This is very funny. Now we see Putin in a Russian tank. The cartoon is entitled Special Military Operation. The sign reads, "Ukraine, stop." Putin continues and falls off the cliff. That's really what's happening. This last meme is just hilarious. Putin is about to pop a blue and yellow balloon, which we all well know is the colors of Ukraine. But instead of popping the balloon representing Ukraine, his balloon is popped. And that's what happened. In a moment, more of my own perspective and a few predictions. There's been a spike in terror against Israelis recently. It could be considered a wave of terror. These most recent terrorists are operating on their own, independent of organizational support and coordination. They're called lone wolves. They are, however, affiliated with IS, the Islamic State, which used to be called ISIS. Lone wolves are very difficult to defend against. They have no real network or command structure. One cannot infiltrate or pay for information about them. Lone wolves get radicalized online from the internet. They get their own info because they are locals. And that is why Israel, the government, is telling Israelis that everyone needs to be alert and vigilant. Every Israeli must try their best to detect these lone wolves. 2 Palestinian Arab terrorists murdered 2 Israeli officers and wounded many others in the city of Hadera before they were killed by undercover police who were having a meal at a cafe nearby. Jordan condemned the attack, Turkey condemned the attack, Bahrain condemned the attack, Egypt condemned the attack, and many other Arab countries condemned the attack. The municipality of al-Fam, an Arab city inside Israel proper, sent official condolences to the families, that is, the families of the 2 terrorists. The official al-Fam statement read, "We send heartfelt condolences for the deaths of Ayman Agrabia and Ibrahim Agrabia. May God take pity on them and forgive them." Earlier in the week, Samir Mahmoud, the mayor of the Arab Israeli city, told Ynet that the municipality and he personally condemned the attack. That statement condemning the attack was later retracted. And it's important to recognize because the municipality said, "We thought it was right to release a condolence statement, as we do when people in the city pass away." But the mayor demanded we erase the statement. Yes, terrorists lived in al-Fam. They were terrorists. al-Fam is an Arab city in the northern part of Israel near Hadera and in the Haifa region. It sits in the middle of the country. It's home to 56,000 people. It's a real city. al-Fam residents, including terrorist Ayman and Ibrahim Agrabia, are full citizens of Israel. Israelis don't send condolences to families of terrorists. They shouldn't do that. The Abraham Accords, begun under the administration of Donald J. Trump, continue to produce positive results. The most recent result is the free trade agreement signed between the United Arab Emirates and Israel. Negotiations for the deal were pretty straightforward. They focused on imports and exports, regulations, customs, government purchases. The most important element in this new agreement is that trade between the 2 nations expand. And that is because the trade will be stimulated by having no tax on any deals between the 2 countries. The groundwork for the deal was laid during Israeli Prime Minister Naftali Bennett's trip to the United Arab Emirates last September. These are very positive moves, huge step forward. There is a significant benefit not only for those countries and these countries that are involved, but also for the entire region. Positive results and important change will emerge because of these Abraham Accords. As mentioned in one of our opinion pieces early on, The foreign ministers of Israel, the United States, Egypt, the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, Morocco concluded a two-day summit at Kibbutz Sde Boker in the Negev desert. Sde Boker was home to Israel's first prime minister, David Ben-Gurion. The 5 Arab nations came to Israel to talk. They all had different agendas and varying priorities. For Israel, it was all about Iran. Not so for the others around the table. Dan Shapiro is a reliable source. He was the former U.S. ambassador to Israel and is now a distinguished fellow at the Atlantic Council's Middle East program. And until last week, he served as the senior advisor to the United States Special Envoy on Iran. Shapiro quoted by the Times of Israel saying, "For the UAE, it might be investment in clean energy. For Bahrain, it might be maritime security. For Morocco, it might be education and agriculture. For Egypt, it might be all of those." Such is the nature of diplomacy and international relations and affairs. Seldom does everything fall into total alignment. We're learning more and more about the poisoning of the Russian oligarch Roman Abramovich and 2 Ukrainian diplomats. The poisoning took place in Kyiv on March 3rd after the negotiations broke up. Abramovich and the Ukrainian member of parliament, Rustem Umerov, along with another diplomat, were all together when they began to experience strange symptoms. Their symptoms, according to reports, included red eyes, constant painful tearing, peeling of skin. Their faces and hands were peeling excessively. Most experts are saying that the dose of poison was small, but big enough to frighten the targets. The objective was not to assassinate, just to terrorize, to frighten. The obvious culprits must have been the Russians, who have a successful history of poison. But many countries use poison, and Russia is claiming that it was not them. The exact quote of the Kremlin spokesman, Dmitry Peskov, is that the reports, quote, "do not correspond to reality," unquote. Another strange sidebar in a very strange story. We've been thinking out loud about a lot today. Now that you know what I've been thinking, let me know what you're thinking. Email me at micah@jbstv.org. Tweet me at Micah Halpern. Tell me what you think. Before we end, let me leave you with one piquante piece of information. Did you know that the late Shimon Peres's favorite phrase was, "You don't make peace with your friends, you make peace with your enemies"? Of course it was correct. No, I'm not speaking about Will Smith and Chris Rock. I'm speaking about Israel and the Palestinians. I'm speaking about Israel and her Arab neighbors. And of course I'm speaking about Ukraine and Russia. Israelis today are less energized about the peace deal with the Palestinians than they have been in many years. At the same time, they are more excited about their new deals with Arab countries that have joined the Abraham Accords. That's obvious. Ukraine and Russia must and will work out some agreement. The sooner, the better. Peace is in everyone's interest. Peace is not just a ceasefire. It's not just a declaration of non-belligerence. Peace means working together on issues of mutual interest. Right now, there is only distrust and animosity. There is anger and even hatred. But with time, hopefully the parties will overcome these issues and will come to realize, to feel it in their kishkas, as they say, that peace is truly in everyone's best interest. Thank you for thinking out loud with me, Micah Halpern. Let's think out loud again next week on JBS.